In Columbus, Ohio, and have a PhD in English literature from the Ohio State University, where I wrote a book-length analysis of disability in 19th century American literature. I'm a lifelong horror fan and also legally blind. I've presented my research around the country and around the world. My dissertation isn't horror-focused, so I'm not going to bore you with the details. But one of my dissertation chapters was about murder and madness in the work of Edgar Allan Poe. So if you want to know any more about that, let me know. Being legally blind gives me a unique perspective on life and on horror. It used to be that I thought very negatively about not being able to see as well as other people, to the point that I thought no matter what I did, I'm always going to be inferior to those who can see in a more normal way. That attitude was the whole reason that I went to graduate school to explore disability studies, and part of the reason why I started this podcast. Now I've come to think of blindness as something that gives me a unique identity. It makes me think differently about things than those who never have to worry about them. For example, let's talk about subtitles. It's a pet peeve of mine to hear people talk about how if you refuse to watch a subtitled film, you're lazy or stupid, not both. For me, subtitles are very challenging to read, and I know these comments are directed to those who they believe can read them, but my experiences have made me sympathetic to those who just don't want to read them even if they can. For one example of that, subtitles can be often formatted poorly. So, black and white movies, they'll have white subtitles, letters, against a white background, which makes them hard for anyone to read. And there are examples of how to do that better. So some Criterion discs actually have the white letters, but there's a black background against them. So there's a black box surrounding them. So there's no overlap between the subtitles and the film. So one of the things I want to do here is, besides just looking at depictions of disabled characters, I also want to talk about the ways in which horror is produced and consumed, the ways in which accessibility or lack thereof can inform the way a work of art is made or how we as an audience perceive it. Horror movies have always been a way for me to find comfort in the struggles of everyday life. I've loved horror movies since I can remember. When I was little, my dad always watched those old black and white horror movies, usually the Universal monster movies. He would tape them on AMC, and I would watch those tapes over and over again. In 4th or 5th grade, I had a friend who would watch the Friday the 13th movies with me on a regular basis. And around the same time, I started reading Stephen King novels such as Cujo and It. I got a bunch of old paperbacks from a friend of my uncle's, and so I just devoured those in the next few years. As I got older, my obsession with horror movies and horror fiction grew. By high school, I had written several horror short stories and novels myself that are thankfully lost to time. I continue to write creatively. I've written a lot of horror fiction, actually. I just haven't published that much of it. And since college, I have gradually built my knowledge of horror, even though it was often a lonely endeavor, as I did not know many other people who nerded out about horror like me. Now that I'm in my 40s, and with the advent of podcasts and social media, I've been able to connect with more people than ever. And that's meant a lot to me. The horror community is an amazing place, and I hope to become better connected with other people in it. That's enough.